In the glittering glass towers of Houston, people looked at Ethan Caldwell as a man who had everything: wealth, power, and a real estate empire stretching across the United States. But behind those gleaming mirrors was a frozen heart, a man who believed he no longer had the right to love or to be a father. Until the day Isabel Rivera, an immigrant quietly making a living as a cleaner, stepped into his life, carrying her warmth and a storm of trials. From the collision of two worlds that seemed irreconcilable, a story of love, justice, and sacrifice began. A story neither could have foreseen would change their destinies forever. Caldwell Plaza rose in the heart of Houston like a giant steel blade, slicing straight into the dull gray sky of a damp morning. The 72-story building was the financial symbol of the entire city, yet to passers-by, it looked more like a cold fortress than a monument of pride. Its glass walls reflected the heavy, overcast clouds, concealing the entire world inside, where Ethan Caldwell reigned like a king without a crown. At 34, Ethan had amassed a fortune of over $12 billion through real estate, oil, and finance. People called him the Ice Prince of Houston, a man who never smiled, never faltered, and never showed weakness. In the business world, the name Caldwell inspired both reverence and fear. Economic magazines wrote about him in the language of power: decisive, ruthless, razor, sharp, intelligent. But such descriptions only touched the surface. Beneath the Armani suits and multi-billion-dollar contracts, Ethan was a man who had lost too much to still believe in happiness. 16 years earlier, Ethan had been driving with Claire Whitmore on a rainy night, the beautiful fiancée he was set to marry within months. A truck, driven by a drunk driver, slammed into their car at the Westheimer intersection. Claire died instantly. Ethan survived, but spent 3 months in the hospital enduring multiple surgeries. When he finally awoke, he received a sentence crueler than death. Internal injuries had left him permanently unable to have children. From that moment, Ethan built his fortress out of money, power, and cold detachment to conceal his pain and convince himself he still had control of his life. Ethan stood before the glass window in his office on the 68th floor, looking down at the stream of cars crowding the I-45 freeway. The morning light reflected his face, a striking but coldly handsome face, with gray eyes devoid of emotion. The people below, workers and immigrants heading to morning shifts, probably imagined that he must be living the dream up here. But the truth was, inside the polished Italian leather shoes and the crisp white shirt without a wrinkle, Ethan felt emptier than any homeless man he had passed on his way into the tower that morning. A soft chime rang from his desk phone. Chloe Patterson, his private secretary, spoke in her familiar tone. "Mr. Caldwell, the candidate for the new housekeeper position, has arrived." Ethan frowned, not taking his eyes off the scene below. "I told Samuel to handle the interview. I don't have time for this." Chloe hesitated, her voice gentle yet firm. "Sir, you specifically instructed 3 months ago that you wanted to personally approve all staff in the residence quarters after the scandal." A chill ran down Ethan's spine at the reminder. His former housekeeper, someone he had trusted, had secretly photographed his private penthouse, the wine cellar, the bedroom, even the bottle of sedatives. Those pictures had ended up in a tabloid, along with filthy rumors about the cold prince with no friends, no lovers. To Ethan, it was a betrayal more painful than bankruptcy. The penthouse on the 72nd floor was the only place where he allowed himself to drop the mask. And now, that sanctuary had been breached. He turned, his voice dry. "Conference room. 5 minutes." The meeting room on the 60th floor glowed with the cold light of fluorescent tubes embedded in the high ceiling. Glass walls, a long walnut table, black leather chairs, everything flawless to the point of lifelessness. Ethan entered. Samuel Green, his longtime butler, was already waiting with a woman. Ethan paused, caught off guard. He had braced himself to meet a middle-aged applicant with a thick resume and wary eyes. Instead, the woman before him was something entirely different. She sat upright, hands placed neatly on her lap, wearing a plain black dress that was old yet clean and tidy. Her dark hair was tied back, revealing a slender neck. Her deep brown eyes shone with something substantial and warm when she lifted her gaze. Samuel's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Caldwell, may I introduce Isabel Rivera? Her resume and references are excellent." Isabel rose and extended her hand. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Ethan hesitated for a second before shaking her hand. Small yet firm, soft but calloused, her gaze startled him most. No avoidance, fear, or attempt to flatter. She looked at him as she would any ordinary man, not the billionaire the press called a money-making machine. "Experience?" Ethan asked, trying to hide his unease. "I worked for Dr. Henry Caldwell Jr.'s family in Houston for 4 years. Before that, I managed cleaning services for several office buildings. I understand the importance of discretion and respecting privacy." Ethan studied her voice, fluent English, with traces of Spanish accent still lingering. He wondered how many obstacles she had overcome to stand here today. "Why did you leave the Caldwell Jr. family?" Isabel lowered her eyes briefly, then answered, "He relocated to Boston. I chose to stay in Houston to care for my grandmother." The word family cut through Ethan's mind like a blade. He once had parents, lost in a plane crash when he was only 27. He once had Claire, the woman who had wanted many children, all gone in a flash. Now all that remained were luxurious rooms, empty of life. His voice turned firm. "This job requires you to live on site. The penthouse has a private staff room. Hours are flexible, but I demand absolute privacy." "I understand, and I respect that." Her answer was calm, without hesitation. Ethan searched her eyes for signs of greed or opportunism, traits he had seen too often in beautiful women. But in Isabel, he found only composure and a glimmer of something that felt like compassion. He decided quickly, "Start tomorrow, 7 a.m. Samuel will show you to your room." As he turned to leave, Isabel's voice called after him, "Mr. Caldwell." He stopped and glanced back. She smiled, not fake or calculated, just a smile that lit up the lifeless room. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you." Ethan gave a slight nod and walked into the hallway, but his heart was racing, something he hadn't felt in 16 years. That night, the penthouse on the 72nd floor remained immaculate. Polished wooden floors, modern paintings on the walls, fine whiskey neatly arranged. Yet when Ethan poured himself 3 sips of Macallan, the smoky burn did nothing to dissolve the cold creeping into his chest. Isabel's dark eyes reappeared in his mind, carrying a strange and dangerous feeling. Hope that his frozen heart had begun to crack after all these buried years, and that frightened him more than any corporate takeover ever could. Houston by night wore an entirely different face. The tangled highways glowed red and white like giant arteries, the roar of truck engines from the port still echoing into the city's core. But on the 72nd floor of Caldwell Plaza, all those sounds were silenced by thick glass. Inside the penthouse, the only noises were the ticking of a grandfather clock and the frantic heartbeat of a man struggling inside a dream. Ethan Caldwell jolted awake, his nightshirt soaked in sweat, his breath ragged. In the dream, he saw Claire again, her golden hair disheveled, her pleading eyes before the light vanished. The clash of metal, the smell of burning fuel, the wail of sirens pounding in his skull. Every time the nightmare returned, Ethan forced himself to endure it alone. But tonight, the bedroom door swung open, and Isabel Rivera appeared. She stood at the threshold, still holding the half-finished rag and bucket. Her voice was soft, but trembling. "Mr. Caldwell, are you all right?" Ethan turned, his eyes wild for a moment before freezing back into their usual mask. He hated nothing more than being seen in weakness. "What are you doing here?" Isabel hesitated as she stepped inside. Moonlight spilled through the window, bathing her face in a pale glow. "I heard. You're shouting. I was afraid something had happened." He turned his face away, wiping the sweat from his brow. "It's nothing. Just a dream. You should return to your room." But she didn't leave. Instead, Isabel came closer to the bed, her voice low and soothing like a lullaby. "Estás a salvo. You're safe now. You're safe." The Spanish and English words were simple, yet carried a strange calm. Ethan stared at her, startled. For the first time in years, he saw eyes that held no pity, no curiosity, and only pure compassion. "Those nightmares, Do they come often? Isabel asked softly. He was silent for a long moment, then admitted, every night. The room sank into stillness. Ethan rarely spoke of himself, but Isabel's presence seemed to tear open the armor he had built around his soul. She pulled a chair and sat beside the bed. I know that feeling, when the darkness isn't just outside the window, but lodged in your chest. Ethan lifted his head. You know? Isabel nodded slowly. I was 19 when I left Mexico. My parents died in a factory fire in Ciudad Juarez. An American company is hiring Mexican labor, with faulty wiring, no insurance, and no escape routes. They died along with 14 others. People called it an accident, but it was a crime to me. She paused, her eyes fixed on some faraway point. Ethan listened silently, his heart pounding not for business, but for the story of a human life. I crossed the border with others and paid coyotes who promised safety. I made it to Texas, but there were costs I never want to remember. Isabel's voice trembled, her hand tightening into a fist. I had only my grandmother left. She raised me with her wrinkled hands, selling tamales at the market. Now it's my turn to take care of her. Ethan saw a tear roll down Isabel's cheek in the dark, though her voice remained steady. That strength made him feel small. And you? Isabel asked. What ghost haunts you? Ethan wanted to dismiss it, but her brown eyes revealed the truth. Quietly, he said, Claire, my fiancée, she died in an accident. I lost everything in a single moment. The doctors told me I would never have children. Since then, I've told myself, a man who can't give a woman a family is unworthy of love. The confession cut out of him like a blade slicing into an old wound. Isabel looked at him not shocked, not pitying, only with a sad but warm smile. Family isn't just blood. Family is love. You haven't lost your ability to love, have you? Ethan choked up. He was used to people who saw only money in his eyes. But Isabel looked through the armor, straight at the man he didn't dare face. In that moment, his hand reached for hers. He wasn't in control this time, clinging to the only lifeline in the night sea. Their breath mingled, their eyes locked. Ethan whispered, You're not afraid of me. Isabel tilted her head, a faint smile crossing her lips. I've known real fear. You're not it. Ethan touched her cheek, his fingers trembling. Both knew the boundaries between employer and employee, between what should and should not be. But in that moment, the boundaries melted. He pulled her close, and their lips met. The first kiss was not tender, but desperate years of loneliness poured into it. Isabel answered, neither resisting nor seizing, only accepting, as if to say, I carry wounds too, and I choose to share them with you. When they finally parted, Ethan shook, his forehead resting against hers. This is madness, Isabel whispered. Maybe, but sometimes madness is the only way to survive. Outside, Houston was still blazed with light, and the traffic roared. But in that vast room, two people sat close together, and for the first time in many years, neither felt entirely alone. Early March in Houston often shifted moods like a mercurial woman. In the morning, sunlight gleamed gold across rooftops. By noon, dark clouds swept in from Galveston Bay. Late afternoon, rain poured in heavy sheets. Those days mirrored his life for Ethan Caldwell, fleeting flashes of light, then swallowed by darkness. But since Isabel Rivera had stepped into Caldwell Plaza, the light seemed to linger a little longer. At first, everything was simple. Isabel worked quietly, punctually, with the thoroughness of any housekeeper Ethan had hired. The once cold penthouse now carried the aroma of warm meals, the hum of the washing machine, and sometimes the faint sound of Spanish songs drifting from the kitchen. For the first time in years, Ethan came home not only to drink whiskey and collapse into heavy sleep, but to breathe air that smelled like life. While reviewing financial reports one evening, Ethan heard a knock on the door. Isabel appeared, holding a notebook. Mr. Caldwell, may I ask you something a little personal? He looked up, frowning. Personal? With me, nearly everything is personal. Isabel smiled. Un faced. I want to study more English, especially work-related English. I know the basics, But my pronunciation and usage aren't correct. Could you teach me? Ethan was taken aback. Until now, no one had asked him for anything except money, opportunity, or a favor. Isabel asked for knowledge. Why do you want to learn? I once dreamed of being a teacher, to teach children. But here, without papers, I can't. At least, if I master English, I could find more work and maybe help my community. And maybe I wouldn't feel like an outsider forever. The words struck something Ethan had never considered. The feeling of being an outsider. He was so wealthy that no one dared tell him the truth, and because of that, he was always on the margins of ordinary life. Now, before him stood a woman with no wealth, no power, but carrying the dream of teaching something Claire had once longed for too. Ethan nodded. All right. Starting tomorrow, every evening after 7, we'll study. Their first lesson occurred in the vast study, warm lamplight reflecting on the walnut shelves. Isabel sat opposite Ethan, with only a notebook, a few pencils, and a steaming cup of tea she had brewed herself on the desk. He opened his laptop, typing out a few basic business terms. Assets means property. Liabilities means debt. Try saying them. Sits, lia, bi, li, tis. Ethan let out a small laugh so rare it startled even himself. No, assets is pronounced s. Ets. Listen to me, he repeated, and Isabel followed, each time more smoothly. Word by word, sentence by sentence, they worked through the lesson. When she finally pronounced them correctly, Ethan felt a strange joy, the joy of seeing someone improve because of him. At the end of the lesson, Isabel closed her notebook and smiled. Thank you, my strict teacher. He froze. It had been so long since he had heard that playful teasing in someone's voice. I can only teach you the language of business. I'm not sure it will help with your dream of teaching. Isabel tilted her head. All language is functional. When children ask, why are we poor? I want to answer in words they fully understand. I want them to know that knowledge is the tool to break the cycle of exploitation that their parents endured. Ethan fell silent. In his eyes, Isabel was not just a housekeeper. She was a flame. The lessons continued, becoming routine. Some nights they discussed finance, others read aloud from a newspaper and corrected pronunciation. Sometimes, Isabel shares childhood stories from Mexico, such as running barefoot on dirt roads and listening to her parents talk about the future. At times, she spoke of Houston, the days of cleaning corporate offices, watching Americans in suits stride past without ever noticing her existence. One night, Ethan blurted, "Do you ever feel injustice?" Isabel gave a faint, bitter smile. "Mr. Caldwell, I've lived my whole life in injustice. My parents died because an American-owned factory didn't install safety systems. Here, I became undocumented. If I fall sick, a hospital might turn me away. If the police stop me, I could be deported. I must stay silent even when underpaid, because I have no right to sue. What do you call that, if not injustice?" Ethan clenched the pen in his hand. Isabel's words cut through the polished canvas he had long used to cover the truth of society. He had thought he understood the world, but knew only the vantage of those at the top. That night, he sat alone by the window, staring at vast Houston. Below, thousands of other Isabels scrubbed offices, cooked meals, built homes, names forgotten, thanks unspoken, while he, with all his wealth, had done nothing but accumulate meaningless numbers. Another evening, as their lesson ended, Isabel suddenly asked, "Have you ever considered creating a scholarship fund for people like me?" Ethan frowned. "You mean, for the undocumented?" "Yes. There are so many bright young people, but they are trapped by paperwork. With scholarships, they could learn trades or go to college. They wouldn't have to spend a lifetime scrubbing floors or washing dishes." The idea was drilled into Ethan's mind. Throughout his career, he had set up dozens of charities, but all for tax breaks or polished headlines. This was the first time he heard an idea that made him want to act for real. He looked at Isabel and saw her eyes shining with conviction. Strangely, he believed in it too. "Maybe. I'll think about it." Isabel smiled, and his heart thumped hard. But amid all this hope, One shadow still hung over him, the shame of his infertility. One night, after Isabel left the study, Ethan remained alone and opened an old notebook hidden in the desk. It was Claire's, filled with dreamy scribbles. A house with many rooms, a swing in the garden, 3 children, at least 2 girls and 1 boy. Ethan closed the notebook, his chest tightening. Even as his heart began to open, he still believed he had no right to give Isabel the family she deserved. And it was this inner struggle between the hope of living and the fear of inadequacy would soon drive him toward choices that would change his life forever. Saturday morning, Houston seemed washed clean after a night of rain. The streets of East End carried the damp scent of earth, the aroma of coffee from a corner cafe, and the smoky tang of meat grilling at small taco stands. This neighborhood was not far from downtown, yet it belonged to another world. No gleaming glass towers, no luxury cars, only cramped apartments with peeling paint and porches strung with bright potted plants. Ethan Caldwell stepped out of his car, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. In dark blue jeans and a crisp white shirt, he looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man visiting his girlfriend's family. But inside, he was anything but ordinary. His heart pounded, his palms damp. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, faced down politicians and veteran CEOs, but never had he felt as vulnerable as now. Isabel squeezed his hand, smiling to reassure him. "My grandmother is a little strict, but don't worry. She wants to be sure I'm happy." They climbed the worn staircase to the 3rd-floor apartment. The door opened after Isabel knocked 3 times. Carmen Rivera appeared petite, her silver hair neatly tied back, her deep brown eyes mirroring her granddaughter's. Though barely 5 feet tall, she radiated a presence that made Ethan falter, as if he were standing before a general. "Abuela, this is Ethan." Isabel was introduced to this in Spanish. Carmen studied Ethan in silence for a long moment before speaking in slow English. "So, this is the man. The one who has taken my granddaughter's heart." Ethan bowed slightly, offering the flowers. "Ma'am, it's an honor to meet you." She accepted the bouquet, set it aside, and focused on him. "Come in. We eat first, then talk." The apartment was small but warm. Old photographs lined the walls. The Rivera's wedding portrait, Isabel's parents in factory uniforms, snapshots of a little Isabel with messy hair and a wide grin. The dining table was worn but laden with food, steaming tamales, golden rice, slow-cooked beans. The rich scents made Ethan's stomach growl, despite being accustomed to refined restaurant fare. "Sit," Carmen gestured. "A man cannot be judged on an empty stomach." Ethan obeyed. She served him a generous plate before taking her own seat. While Isabel chatted cheerfully about work, Carmen said little, only watching Ethan silently. He felt every glance like a blade, testing the truth of him. After the meal, as Isabel cleared the dishes, Carmen spoke slowly. "Ethan Caldwell, I hear you are wealthy and powerful. Rich men often believe they can buy anything, including a woman's heart. What about you?" Ethan straightened, meeting her eyes. "Ma'am, I don't want to buy anything. I love Isabel not because she works for me, but because she is beautiful. I love her because she gave me something I thought was gone forever. Faith." Carmen narrowed her eyes. "Words are easy, actions are harder. My granddaughter has suffered enough. She lost her parents and grew up under the weight of immigration. I will not let anyone make her a plaything." Ethan drew a deep breath. This was the moment to speak the truth he had hidden from the world. "I, too, have lost. I was once engaged. She died in an accident, and I cannot have children." Carmen's eyes flickered. In the kitchen, Isabel froze, the dish towel in her hand motionless. Ethan went on, his voice steady but heavy. "I don't say this for pity. I say it so you know. If Isabel chooses me, it will never be for a big family or carrying on a lineage. It will only be for love. And I promise I will make her happy with everything I have left." The room fell silent. Carmen studied him for a long time. Then her gaze softened. "Son, you dared to confess your weakness. That is a strength. But remember, love alone does not sustain a family. It requires responsibility and patience. Are you ready for that?" "I am ready." Carmen gave a slow nod. Isabel stepped back into the room, her eyes glistening. She had heard it all. That afternoon, They strolled the neighborhood with Carmen. Children kicked a ball across the concrete courtyard, and women chatted on porches. Isabel held Ethan's hand openly, without fear. For the first time, he felt he belonged more to this place than to the glass fortress of Caldwell Plaza. At sunset, they stopped at Buffalo Bayou Park. The water shimmered crimson, small boats drifting lazily. Ethan turned to Isabel, his hand trembling. Isabel Rivera. Everything changed from the day you entered my life. I no longer want to hide behind glass walls. I want a home, a family with you. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket. Inside lay an antique gold ring, flanked by 2 small diamonds around an emerald. This was my grandmother's. I want you to wear it, not for its worth, but because it binds our families together. Will you marry me? Isabel froze, tears spilling over. After a breathless pause, she nodded hard, laughing through her sobs. Yes, Ethan. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. Nearby children, curious, cheered as if on cue. From a distance, Carmen smiled, her eyes shining with a hope she thought long lost. Ethan held Isabel tight. For the first time in 16 years, his heart beat not just for survival but for love. And in that embrace, he knew the ice fortress had begun to collapse completely. On the 70th floor of Caldwell Plaza, the air was strung tight like a wire. Victoria Caldwell sat upright, her Chanel dress hugging a figure still graceful, despite her 60-plus years. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her gaze sharp as a blade. On the polished mahogany table lay an open file, photographs of Isabel Rivera, a brief resume, and details Victoria had pried from the immigrant community. Do you know what you're doing, Ethan? Her voice was metallic. Engaged to an illegal immigrant? Do you understand how much filth that will drag onto the Caldwell name? Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, fighting to stay calm. He had braced himself for this confrontation, but his mother's words made his blood boil. You had her followed? I have the right to protect the family's honor. She does not belong to our world. Ethan turned, grey eyes blazing. Our world? Do you mean empty cocktail parties or arranged marriages for political gain? If that's the world you want, I want no part of it. Victoria drew a long breath, reining in her anger. Ethan, you are the sole heir. Your father built an empire. We need a wife worthy of standing beside you. Madeline Langford is perfect good breeding, well-educated, from a powerful family. At that name, Ethan felt a chill. Clearly, the pressure to marry wasn't just for family. It was about political alliances. I don't love Madeline, Ethan said firmly. I love Isabel. Victoria's hand slammed the table. Love? Son, love is a luxury. It fades. Power and reputation are what last. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but burning. Did you ever have love? Or did you also marry for status? For the first time, he saw her eyes waver, but only for a moment. They froze again. Your father and I were a perfect union. That is why the Caldwell Empire still stands. And that is why I will not let a maid drag you into the mud. The door creaked open. Isabel stood in the threshold, her brown eyes wet. She had heard enough. I'll go, she whispered, voice shaking but resolute. I won't be the cause of tearing apart your family. Ethan spun, striding to her, gripping her hand. No, Isabel, you're not going anywhere. Victoria laughed coldly. See, even she knows her place. Ethan stood protectively before Isabel, staring down his mother. You will not insult her. If you cannot respect Isabel, then from today, you have no place in my life. You dare. I dare. And I have decided. Silence fell like a hammer. Victoria glared, her lips trembling with fury, but she said nothing more. Ethan pulled Isabel out, leaving his mother alone in the lavish but frozen boardroom. In the elevator, Isabel slipped her hand from his, eyes brimming. Ethan, I don't want to cause a rift between you and your mother. He turned, his voice softened. Isabel, you didn't cause anything. She chose this. You are the one I chose. And I won't let anyone, not even my mother, make you feel small. She buried her head against his chest, choked with tears. Behind his words was absolute resolve. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell put love above family, above fortune, above politics. That night, he sat alone in the penthouse with an untouched glass of whiskey. Outside, Houston glowed in a blaze of lights. He knew his decision was more than family drama. It would unleash a storm. The Langfords, the business partners, and the board of directors would not sit quietly. But Ethan felt no regret. In his mind was only Isabel, her radiant brown eyes, the smile that lit a room, and the small hand he had vowed never to let go. The Caldwell empire might tremble, but for the first time, Ethan's heart stood unshaken. Monday morning began like any other at Caldwell Plaza. Staff gathering in the grand lobby, elevators in constant motion, phones ringing non-stop. In his 70th floor office, Ethan Caldwell had just signed a real estate contract in Louisiana when the internal line buzzed urgently. Chloe Patterson's voice came through, shaken in a way he had never heard. "Mr. Caldwell, the FBI is here." Ethan's head snapped up, brows furrowed. "How many?" "At least 8. All wearing jackets marked FBI. They have a warrant." Before he could react, the door burst open. 3 men and 1 woman in dark suits strode in, badges raised. The woman, silver-haired, her eyes hard as steel, spoke firmly. "Ethan Caldwell? I'm Special Agent in Charge Karen Casey, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search and arrest you on charges of money laundering, tax fraud, and violations of the Federal Banking Act." For a moment, the room lost its air. Chloe froze in shock, and Samuel Green rushed from the hall, face drained of blood. Ethan remained icy calm as he rose, his suit buttons still fastened neatly. "This must be a mistake. I want to call my attorney." "You'll have the chance. But for now, we're seizing all computers, financial records, and personal drives." Ethan saw dozens of agents swarming in through the glass wall, locking down the 70th floor and rifling through offices. His empire was being dissected before his eyes. News spread like wildfire. Local stations crowded outside Caldwell Plaza, cameras zooming in on agents hauling out boxes of files. "Houston billionaire arrested for money laundering," blared across screens. People who once bowed to Ethan now whispered, their eyes sharp with curiosity and satisfaction. Agent Casey laid a thick file before him in a temporary interrogation room. "Here's the evidence. Over $78 million were transferred into offshore Cayman accounts, and your signature was on every transfer. And we have a witness. Ryan Ellsworth, your former partner." Ethan's chest tightened. Ryan. The name hit like a knife. Ryan Ellsworth had once been the company's closest friend and co-founder, but he sold his shares and walked away 8 years ago. "What did Ryan say?" Ethan rasped. "He claims you masterminded everything, using the company as a front to launder illicit transactions. In return, we granted him immunity." Ethan let out a dry, bitter laugh. "He sold me out for what?" Casey's gaze stayed cold. "Protective immunity, and money for his daughter's medical treatment." The words struck harder than a blow. "Emma, Ryan's 6-year-old daughter has leukemia." Ethan remembered that Ryan had been desperate for help, and in his own whirlwind, Ethan had missed the signs, missed his friend's pleas. He leaned over the table, voice low and fierce. "I swear, I never opened those accounts. That signature is forged." Casey shrugged. "That's for your lawyer to prove." That afternoon, Isabel was summoned for questioning. Agents spread photographs across the table, her in the lavish penthouse, her use of a credit card in Ethan's name, and medical bills for Carmen Rivera covered through Caldwell accounts. "Miss Rivera," one agent said coldly, "are you aware you could be considered an accomplice? Mr. Caldwell may have used illicit funds to support your family." Isabel trembled but held her head high. "I am just a housekeeper. I know nothing about his finances." "And the credit card, the hospital bills, those were his kindness, not a crime." The agent leaned closer, voice like ice. "Remember, your immigration status is precarious. If this investigation shows you benefited from illicit funds, deportation is on the table." When Isabel left the room, her face was pale, but her eyes burned. They could threaten her, but she would not abandon Ethan. That evening, attorney David Morrison was finally allowed to meet Ethan. He dropped a stack of papers with a weary sigh. Ethan, it doesn't look good. The evidence is nearly airtight. Signatures, recordings, computer logs. Recordings? Yes. Audio of your voice discussing transfers through shell companies. Ethan went rigid. His own voice, but words he had never spoken. It was as if someone had pieced together fragments to fabricate entire conversations. Who's behind this? He demanded. David hesitated. I've heard whispers. Senator Richard Langford. The name fell like a hammer. Ethan understood instantly. Langford, the father of Madeline, the woman his mother had pushed him toward, the family that had wanted him bound to them in marriage. He refused. He chose Isabel. And now, the Caldwell empire was being toppled by Langford's hand. He wants to drag me back onto the chessboard, Ethan murmured. But he doesn't know I won't play. David gripped his shoulder. We'll fight. But you need to prepare. Detention, trial, the press. And Isabel, she'll be their easiest target. Ethan closed his eyes. Isabel's image burned in his mind. Those fierce brown eyes, that smile that had lit the penthouse, the fragile hand he swore to protect. Even if it costs him everything. That night, Ethan lay on a steel bed beneath flickering fluorescent lights in the holding cell. The stench of mildew, the distant shouts of inmates seeped into him. He had lived in opulence. Now he faced concrete and iron. But what tore at him most was imagining Isabel dragged into the legal storm, threatened with deportation from the only home she knew. He clenched his fists. Senator Langford could seize the company and tarnish his name, but he would not steal this love. Even if it meant sacrificing his freedom, Ethan would find a way to save Isabel. And in that moment, he understood. This collapse was more than the fall of wealth. It was the death of his old self. From here on, the battle was no longer for profit but for justice, for himself, for Isabel, for everyone crushed beneath the weight of power. Harris County Jail sat nearly an hour outside downtown Houston, a block of gray concrete wrapped in barbed wire like a snarling beast. Ethan Caldwell was no longer a billionaire or the owner of Caldwell Plaza. He was inmate 14782, dressed in a sagging orange jumpsuit, living in the stench of sweat, mildew, and the ceaseless shouts of men stacked into cages. Each night, on the narrow steel bed, Ethan remembered the penthouse, the polished floors, the glass of Macallan, the city sprawling beneath him. But what he longed for was not luxury. It was Isabel's clear brown eyes and small yet steady hands. One afternoon, attorney David Morrison visited. Amid the noise of the visitation hall, he laid a file on the metal table. Ethan, the prosecutor has offered a deal. Plead guilty, surrender your assets, and they'll cut the sentence down to 8 years. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. 8 years? In 8 years I'll have lost everything. At least you'd have a chance to walk free. If we fight and lose, you could be locked up for life. And they're threatening to expand the investigation to Isabel. The words stabbed deep. Ethan lowered his head, voice raw. They cannot touch her. David's eyes were tired. They can. That's why sometimes sacrifice is the only way to protect the one you love. Meanwhile, outside, Isabel Rivera waged a quiet war. She was no longer just a housekeeper or fiancée. She became the heart of a hidden network of invisible people, janitors, guards, cleaners in government buildings. One night, in her small East End apartment, Isabel gathered with 3 allies: Jorge, a courthouse maintenance worker; Maria, a janitor at Langford's office; and Luis, a night guard at a financial firm. All were immigrants, many undocumented. They lived in society's shadows, voiceless. But precisely because of that, they had power. No one noticed them, yet they saw and heard everything. I found this, Maria said, setting a USB drive on the table. Draft sponsorship contracts from Langford's office. It lists the shell companies. And this, Luis added, was camera footage of his aide carrying bags of documents out one night. I copied it. Isabel's eyes burned with resolve. We must gather it all. Not just to save Ethan, but to prove the truth. The powerful have exploited us too long. Jorge gave a weary laugh. Who will believe us? The press. Those who still have a conscience. If we provide enough evidence, they can't ignore it. In jail, Ethan received an unsigned letter. The shaky handwriting was hers. "Ethan, don't worry about me. I'm doing what we both believe is right. I'm not running. I won't let you carry this alone. They call us illegal. But we know the truth. We have the right to exist, love, and demand justice." He read it again and again until the paper was creased and worn. In the darkness of his cell, he saw a glimmer of light. Isabel was fighting. A week later, David returned, this time with a wiry man whose eyes glinted with sharp intelligence. Remy Castor, the investigative journalist who had exposed more than one scandal. Remy sat down, sliding a bundle of photos and papers across the table. "I've been working with Isabel. She and her network gathered this. Proof that Langford orchestrated it all." Ethan flipped through the evidence. Langford signing documents, aides handing off thick envelopes, bank accounts in shell company names, printed emails where Langford discussed taking down Caldwell through the law. Ethan's throat tightened. "She's risking too much." "If he finds out," Remy nodded. "I know. But she said clearly, she's not afraid for herself, only that you might give up." David leaned in. "The problem is, courts won't touch this easily. Langford has allies in the system. We need another route. Exposure." Remy smiled. "A leak to the press. Once the public erupts, prosecutors can't look away." Ethan clenched his fists. For the first time, he felt real hope. Isabel pressed on, hiding in plain sight. She rented a back room above a friend's corner store, turning it into their hub. Night after night, she, Maria, and Jorge sorted through footage, cross-referenced documents, and scribbled notes. Once, Maria whispered nervously, "If they catch us, I'll be deported. I'll lose my kids." Isabel clasped her hand, voice firm. "They've taken enough from us already. Silence only lets them keep going. You're doing this for your children, those who come after." Her words spread like fire. More people joined, kitchen workers, drivers, even a disillusioned secretary. A nameless, leaderless network, bound only by one belief: justice was not reserved for the rich. One April morning, headlines exploded nationwide. Senator Richard Langford, tied to money laundering, leaked evidence emerges. Televised broadcasts, displayed files, emails, and damning footage. Ethan's name resurfaced not as the billionaire money launderer, but as the victim of a political setup. In jail, Ethan watched the tiny TV, heart hammering, eyes wet. He knew this was Isabel. She had done what he had never dared to dream. That afternoon, Agent Casey appeared at his cell, her face heavy. "Mr. Caldwell, you may be granted temporary release. We have to reopen the case." Ethan only gave a thin smile. He knew he was not free yet, but a door had opened, and it had not been lawyers or politicians who forced it ajar. It was Isabel, the woman once dismissed as an outsider. That night, sitting on the steel bed, he whispered into the darkness as if across the bars to her, "Isabel, you've done what I never did, believing in the invisible's strength. If freedom comes, I will spend the rest of my life at your side fighting for their justice." In the shadows of the jail, Ethan Caldwell was no longer the ice prince. He was a man learning how to love, sacrifice, and stand with the despised to reclaim the light. The heavy iron door swung open. Ethan Caldwell's footsteps echoed through the corridor of Harris County Jail. His orange jumpsuit had been traded for an old white shirt and khaki trousers that David Morrison had brought. When the sunlight hit his face at the gate, it felt blinding. 6 weeks behind bars had turned the outside world into something foreign. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward him. "Mr. Caldwell, any comment on your release? Is it true you were framed? Do you plan to return to business?" Ethan gave only one answer. "I have nothing to say, except this: the truth always wins." He walked on, leaving David to shield him from the frenzy of cameras. At the corner, Isabel was waiting. Her figure had grown thinner through the weeks of strain, but her warm brown eyes and radiant smile shone like Houston's sun after a storm. He rushed to her, wrapping her in his arms. Surrounded by lenses and whispers, they kissed. After everything, this was the only thing that mattered: love. That night, they returned to Isabel's temporary East End apartment, a cramped 40 square meters, with peeling paint and a creaky wooden bed. Ethan sat down, smiling. Our home. Isabel laid her hand on his. We've lost everything. But you know what? I've never felt richer than I do now. He chuckled softly. The words were strange for a man who had lived in a 72-story penthouse, yet he understood. Richness now meant freedom, love, and a life no longer hidden. The next day, David met them at a small cafe, placing a thin file on the table. Ethan, the bad news is your assets are gone, frozen, liquidated for legal fees, taxes, and dozens of lawsuits. You walk out with nothing. Ethan only nodded. And the good news? David smiled faintly. Public opinion is shifting. People see you as a victim who stood up to political power. If you want, you could rebuild your empire. Investment funds are waiting to back you. Ethan looked at Isabel, then shook his head. No, I won't go back to that road. David frowned. Then what will you do? Isabel spoke firmly. We'll build a foundation, not for profit but for people like me, like my family. Ethan nodded. The Caldwell Rivera Foundation, to support immigrants, fight labor exploitation, and provide scholarships. David stared, stunned. You realize how hard that will be? No money, no political clout, no reputation. Ethan smiled. I once built an empire from nothing. I'll do it again this time, not on the backs of others. Weeks later, the Caldwell Rivera Foundation opened its doors. Its office sat in a shabby East End building. Wooden desks, second-hand computers, and a simple printed sign. Isabel met immigrant families directly, while Ethan, no longer in Armani suits, sat in a plastic chair, taking notes on their stories. A family from Honduras came seeking help. The father had cheated 3 months' wages from a construction boss. A Mexican woman begged for aid. Her 17-year-old son was detained for lacking papers. A group of Guatemalan workers described the dangerous conditions of a meatpacking plant. Ethan listened. Each story struck like a hammer against the illusions he once clung to. He had lived among reports and numbers. Now he saw faces, heard fears. Once, a man asked hesitantly, Mr. Caldwell, why would a billionaire help people like us? Ethan smiled sadly. Because I once thought I was rich, but I was poor. Now that I have nothing, I realize I have everything. The chance to stand with you. Isabel worked tirelessly. She ran free English classes for women, tutored children, and drafted complaints with Ethan. At first, people doubted. A billionaire and an immigrant, were they truly on their side? But little by little, trust grew through each legal victory and each scholarship awarded. One day, they went to federal court to support a class action lawsuit against a major construction firm. The company's lawyer sneered, Mr. Caldwell, from CEO to cheap lawyer for immigrants. How pitiful. Ethan only smiled. On the contrary, for the first time, my work matters. The court ruled against the company, ordering $500,000 in compensation for 40 workers. As they left, the men embraced Ethan, tears streaming down their faces. He felt lighter than he ever had, signing billion-dollar contracts. That night, Ethan sat beside Isabel in their small apartment as she carefully recorded the foundation's activities in a notebook. He looked at her and whispered, You know, Isabel, without you, I'd still be trapped in that glass tower, believing money was everything. She looked up, smiling. And without you, I'd still be a cleaning woman, resigned to fate. We found each other, and from the ashes, we built a new life. He took her hand. Outside, Houston roared on. But inside the small room was a quiet peace, rebirth. Ethan Caldwell had lost everything, his company, penthouse, and reputation. But he was born anew, with a heart that could love, a love that could sacrifice, and a mission greater than himself, to turn darkness into light for the forgotten. Summer came early to Houston, sunlight spilling gold across the streets of East End, pouring through the windows of the modest Caldwell Rivera Foundation office. Inside, the air buzzed with life. Volunteers on calls with community lawyers, women with babies waiting to file assistance forms, and Isabel teaching third-grade math to a cluster of children. At the back desk, Ethan studied the foundation's expense ledger. The numbers glowed red, showing they were nearly out of money, but strangely, he felt no despair. This kind of scarcity made him feel alive. Every dollar spent was tied to a face, a story no longer hollow transactions on a trading floor. When class ended, Isabel dropped into the chair beside him, sighing, though her smile lingered. These kids remind me of myself, studying while glancing at the clock, hoping my parents would return from their shift in time. Ethan watched her closely. A familiar thought rose. If they had children, they would be like Isabel, resilient, warm, brave, even in hardship. He placed his hand gently over hers. Isabel, have you ever thought about children? She froze for a moment. Her gaze was tender, yet troubled. I have. But you... I know, Ethan cut in, his voice low. After the accident, the doctors said I couldn't. Silence fell. Isabel squeezed his hand. Then we'll walk another path. Adoption, or becoming a home for children in the community. What matters isn't blood, it's love. Her words untied a knot that had bound him for years. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, love made a family, not genetics. A week later, they visited a gynecologist at a community clinic. The doctor, a kind Indian-American woman, studied Ethan's file before speaking. I've seen a few cases like yours, Mr. Caldwell. The odds are extremely low, but not zero. There are new fertility methods, expensive, but possible to try. Ethan sat still, remembering the old physician's verdict years ago. You will never have children. That sentence froze his heart and convinced him he was unworthy of love. Yet Isabel had proven otherwise. How much chance? Ethan asked. Less than 5%. He gave a bitter laugh. Isabel leaned close and whispered, 5% is still hope. The doctor smiled. But if you choose not to pursue that, know this. Many children need love. Consider that too. They stopped at a small park near Buffalo Bayou on their way back. Children ran in the grass while parents laughed on benches. Ethan and Isabel sat quietly, watching a young couple guide their toddler's first steps. The simple scene tightened their hearts. Isabel rested her head on his shoulder. I don't know what kind of parents we'll be, but I know this. I want a family with you. Ethan wrapped his arm around her. So do I. If not by blood, then by heart. The chance came sooner than expected. One evening, a young woman named Anna knocked on the foundation's office door, cradling a baby girl no more than a year old. Her eyes were dark with exhaustion. I don't know where else to go, she choked out. I'm facing deportation. If they take me, what happens to my baby? Isabel gathered the child in her arms, heart twisting. The baby's black eyes stared at her, tiny fingers clutching her shirt. Ethan stood frozen, his whole body trembling. In that instant, he saw a family imperfect, unconventional, but overflowing with love. That night, after Anna and her child were given shelter in a church, Isabel turned to Ethan. Do you see? So many children need parents. We can be part of their lives. Ethan's eyes burned with resolve. Yes, and I want to start now. They registered for a foster program for immigrant children separated from their parents. The process was long. Interviews, home checks, endless forms. But Ethan and Isabel pressed on. They rearranged their apartment, turning the living room into a play space, gathering donated toys from the community. The first day they welcomed 2 Guatemalan siblings, Diego, 8, and Lucia, 6, into their apartment. Their hearts pounded. The children were timid and fearful. Isabel soothed them patiently, while Ethan sat on the floor piecing together puzzles. That night, when he saw Diego asleep, clutching an old teddy bear, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He whispered to Isabel, I never thought I could be a father, but now, I want nothing more than to be one. She brushed away his tear, smiling softly. Let's start by being parents to the children who need us most. In the days that followed, their small apartment filled with life. Isabel prepared simple morning breakfasts, and Ethan drove the kids to school. Evenings they cooked, played board games, and told stories. Though foster care was temporary, they both knew. A real family had formed. One evening, Lucia looked up shyly and asked in broken English, Uncle Ethan, can I call you Papa? Ethan's throat tightened. He pulled her close. Yes, mi niña, you can. At that moment, he understood that the dream of parenthood did not need perfection. It required love strong enough to fill the emptiness. That night, under the dim glow of their apartment lamp, Ethan and Isabel sat hand in hand, listening to Diego and Lucia's steady breathing from the bedroom. Ethan whispered, "Steady and sure. Isabel, we lost everything and rebuilt from the ashes, but I believe the best is still ahead. A home, complete with children who call us Mom and Dad." Tears shimmered in Isabel's smile. "I believe it too. And I know, no matter what, we'll have the family we deserve." Outside, Houston roared with noise, but inside their small apartment, a quiet dream was woven. The dream of parenthood, born between two people who once thought their hearts had no room for hope. That winter in Houston was gentler than most. Christmas lights twinkled around the window in the cramped East End apartment as the children bustled about decorating a small tree with handmade ornaments. Diego carefully hung a silver paper star at the top, while Lucia spun in her red dress, laughing. Isabel sat nearby, stitching up Lucia's worn teddy bear, softly humming a Spanish carol. Ethan leaned in the doorway, watching quietly. He remembered himself 2 years earlier, a lonely man in a cold penthouse, haunted by whiskey and nightmares. Who could have imagined that he would have this in just a few years, a home alive with laughter, a family? "Papa, is the tree beautiful?" Diego called, eyes shining. Ethan knelt, ruffling his hair. "The most beautiful in Houston." Lucia chimed in, pouting. "But there are no presents." Ethan laughed. He had tucked away a few modest toys wrapped in bright paper, not extravagant, but enough for the children to feel loved. Since Diego and Lucia arrived, Ethan and Isabel's lives had completely transformed. No more endless nights buried in legal briefs or silence over Scotch glasses. Instead, laughter, squabbles, homework, and bedtime stories. Isabel slipped into motherhood so naturally that it stunned even her. She taught Lucia to read, cooked Guatemalan dishes so Diego could taste home. Once terrified of children because of his shame, Ethan was now Papa. Ethan, the bedtime storyteller, the bike repairman, the quiet listener when Diego whispered fears of being separated from his sister. One night, after the children slept, Ethan whispered to Isabel, "I once thought I could never be a father, but you and these kids, you've given me a second chance." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You're not just a father. You're our anchor. Mine, and theirs." The Caldwell Rivera Foundation also grew. After several successful lawsuits, non-profits and donors began to notice. Funding trickled in, never lavish, but enough to expand. They rented an old warehouse, 3 times larger than their first office, hanging a modest sign, "Justice for All, Kong Li Chotatka." On opening day, dozens of immigrant families gathered. Children sang and danced, women brought home-cooked food, and Ethan spoke before the crowd. No Armani suit, no media spotlight, just a man with a steady, warm voice. "We are here to remind each other that justice is not a privilege, it is a right, and together we will defend it." Thunderous applause filled the room. Isabel looked at him, her eyes glowing with pride. But the greatest miracle came from where they least expected. One morning, Isabel felt unusually tired. At first, she blamed work and caring for the children. But when her cycle was late, she bought a pregnancy test at the corner pharmacy. In the tiny bathroom, when 2 pink lines appeared, she froze. Tears welled, uncertain if from fear or joy. She remembered the doctor's words, "Less than 5% chance." Yet here it was, the impossible, made real. That evening, when Ethan came home, she placed the test on the kitchen table. He looked down, then up, his grey eyes trembling with disbelief. "Isabel?" She nodded, smiling through tears. We're going to have a baby." Ethan staggered, then broke into sobs, the dam of years bursting. He held her tight, repeating, "Thank you, thank you." Diego and Lucia ran out, puzzled at the sight of grown-ups crying. Isabel pulled them close, whispering, "You're going to have a little sibling." Lucia squealed. Diego thought deeply, then grinned. "The baby will have the best family in the world." Months of pregnancy brought both joy and worry. Isabel juggled her work at the foundation, while Ethan learned to cook, clean, and shoulder every small detail. He refused to let her bear the burdens alone. Each night, before sleep, he lay a hand on her belly and whispered, "Little one, your father has waited for you his whole life." Isabel laughed softly. "And remember, even without this miracle, we've been parents since we welcomed Diego and Lucia." Ethan nodded. He understood. Family was built by choice, not just biology. Yet this child felt like a gift, unexpected, but perfectly timed, for two hearts that had once been broken but dared to love again. When the day came, the entire foundation held its breath. Isabel gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a community hospital. As the doctor placed the tiny, red-faced infant on her chest, Ethan collapsed into tears, clutching her hand. "Welcome to the world, Gabriel," he whispered. Isabel smiled weakly. Gabriel Caldwell Rivera, the name of an angel. Diego and Lucia visited, holding their new brother with trembling hands. Lucia whispered, "He has Papa's eyes." The small room overflowed with laughter, tears, and love beyond measure. Months later, in their slightly larger rented home, 4 children filled the dinner table with chatter. Diego, Lucia, and baby Gabriel in his crib. Ethan bustled with spoonfuls of porridge, and Isabel laughed tiredly but joyfully. Outside, Houston roared with injustice yet unresolved. But inside, another world had been built, a world where love had triumphed over loss. A man once convinced he was broken had become a father, and an immigrant once dismissed as outsider had become the pillar of family and community. Ethan looked around the table, voice low but firm. "I once was the wealthiest man in Houston, but now I am genuinely the richest of all." Isabel took his hand, smiling. "Because we have everything: family, love, and justice." Beyond their walls, the city surged. But within their small home, a truth rang clear. When two people dared to tear down the walls of prejudice, when they dared to believe in each other, miracles became possible. And that was the miracle of love.